My name's Daniel, and I'm 28 years old. Growing up, I always knew there was a quiet but powerful divide running through my family, a split called favoritism. My younger sister Claire, who's 25 now, has always been my parents' undisputed favorite, especially my father's. What began as small differences in childhood spiraled into a lifetime of imbalance that shaped how I saw myself, my worth, and my place in my own family. One of my earliest memories that sums it all up is from when I was 5 and Claire was 2. For her birthday, my parents threw her a full-scale carnival in our backyard. There were professional face painters, a petting zoo, and even a bouncy castle. I remember running around in awe, part jealous, part excited because it felt like a real festival. That same year, my own 5th birthday was a modest family dinner with a grocery store cake. It wasn't just a one-off. It set the pattern for how things would go for the next 2 decades. As kids, Claire always got the newest toys, the fancier clothes, and the lion's share of my parents' attention. When I was 10, I saved my allowance for months to buy myself a new bike. The day I proudly wheeled it home, Claire threw a meltdown because she wanted one too. Instead of teaching her about saving or patience, my parents went out the next day and bought her an even better, more expensive bike. It was like my efforts never mattered. School was another arena where the favoritism played out painfully. My parents attended every one of Claire's dance recitals, art shows, and class presentations. Meanwhile, my own milestones were forgotten or overshadowed. In 4th grade, I landed the lead role in our school play, a part I'd worked on for weeks. On the night of the performance, my parents arrived an hour late because Claire had complained of a stomach ache. She was fine later, but they missed my big scene. It felt like my achievements were invisible. Academically, I poured myself into my studies. I joined the math club, pulled straight A's through middle school, and even won 1st place in a regional science fair. But my parents barely acknowledged it. Claire, meanwhile, once got a B+ in her weakest subject and was rewarded with a celebratory dinner and a brand new phone to encourage her to keep improving. No matter what I achieved, I couldn't seem to measure up. By high school, I was determined to earn their approval somehow. I kept a 4.0 GPA, led the debate team, edited the school newspaper, and threw myself into every activity that might make them notice me. Meanwhile, Claire drifted through school, barely maintaining a C average, focused more on hanging out with friends than on studies. But it didn't matter. She was still the golden child. One of my proudest moments came during junior year of college when I was selected as one of 2 students from my university to attend a prestigious summer program at Harvard. I was thrilled and couldn't wait to tell my parents. When I shared the news over dinner, my dad barely looked up and changed the subject to Claire's upcoming dance showcase. My mom gave me a half-hearted, "That's nice," before moving on. When the time came for me to fly out, they couldn't even drive me to the airport because it was the same night as Claire's concert. All those moments built up in me a quiet, gnawing realization. No matter what I did, Claire would always be their priority. The older I got, the clearer it became that love and support in my family weren't unconditional. They were reserved for my sister. Despite the painful dynamic at home, I tried to carve out my own path. By the time I finished college, with honors, by the way, I had landed a solid job in finance. By 27, I had even managed to buy my own modest house. My parents never seemed particularly proud, but I was finally building a life independent from their constant judgment. Then came the turning point. My grandfather on my father's side passed away not long ago. He was a remarkable man, a self-made businessman who'd built up a sizable estate from scratch. He and I were close in a quiet way. He was reserved but attentive, the type who never forgot birthdays and always slipped me crisp bills for good grades. He noticed my efforts even when my parents didn't. When his will was read, I found out he had decided to split his assets equally among all his grandchildren, including me, Claire, and our cousins, as well as among his own children, my dad and his siblings. My portion of the inheritance was significant, about $500,000. It was more money than I'd ever seen at once. It opened up possibilities I'd never dreamed I'd have so early in life. Paying off my student loans, investing, maybe even launching my own business one day. I was stunned and grateful. It felt like my grandfather was reaching across from beyond the grave to tell me, "You matter just as much as anyone else." But the happiness didn't last long. Even as the lawyer read out the will, I could see the flicker of discontent in my parents' eyes. It was subtle at first. A tightening of my dad's jaw, my mom's fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Later that evening, they pulled me aside in hushed, urgent voices. They told me they felt it was unfair that I would get the same amount as Claire. According to them, Claire, who still lived in my parents' basement and worked part-time as a barista, needed the money more. They insisted that I, with my job and my house, was already fine. Claire, they claimed, was struggling, and it was my duty as her brother to help. I was floored. I tried to stay calm. I explained gently that the will was Grandpa's decision, and they didn't have the right to change how he chose to divide his estate. But they wouldn't listen. My parents kept pushing, guilt-tripping me, calling me selfish and ungrateful. My dad rattled off every instance from my childhood when they'd helped me, like paying for my braces, buying school supplies, or letting me live at home during college. He conveniently skipped over the car they'd bought for Claire, the shopping sprees, and the fact that they were still supporting her financially well into her mid-20s. The conversation spiraled quickly. They demanded I do the moral thing and hand my entire share of the inheritance to Claire. When I refused, they grew more hostile, accusing me of wanting to profit from Grandpa's death. All the old wounds reopened. I felt like I was a kid again, trying desperately to prove that I deserved to be treated fairly. But this time, I stood my ground. I told them that Grandpa had known exactly what he was doing and that he wanted all his grandchildren to be treated equally. That only made them angrier. They insisted Grandpa would have changed his mind if he'd known the reality of Claire's situation. My mother even accused me of speaking ill of the dead for suggesting otherwise. Claire, for her part, looked uncomfortable. When I tried to speak with her alone, she shrugged and mumbled, "Mom and Dad know best." She clearly wasn't prepared to challenge them, which left me even more isolated. What hurt most wasn't just the money. It was the realization that, even after everything I'd worked for, my parents still valued my sister's comfort over my right to be treated equally. Their love seemed perpetually conditional on me sacrificing myself for Claire. That night, lying in bed, I kept turning Grandpa's decision over in my mind. He'd been a fair man. He'd wanted his grandchildren to start out on equal footing, and for the first time, I wondered if I finally owed it to myself to stand up for what was right, even if it meant clashing head-on with my own parents. After that explosive conversation with my parents, I thought things might cool down. Maybe they'd accept Grandpa's wishes, however reluctantly, but I should have known better. A few days later, my father dropped the bombshell. Acting in his role as one of the executors of Grandpa's will, he announced that he'd decided to reinterpret Grandpa's intentions. According to him, Grandpa would have wanted my entire share of the inheritance to go to Claire if he'd truly understood our family's unique situation. My dad claimed he was simply doing the right thing. I felt my stomach drop through the floor. Not only was this emotionally devastating, it was blatantly illegal. Grandpa's will was clear. Equal shares for all the grandchildren. And yet my father seemed utterly convinced he could override Grandpa's explicit wishes. I tried reasoning with him. I reminded him that Grandpa had been of sound mind and had included a specific clause stating that if anyone challenged the equal distribution, they'd forfeit their share. My father brushed it off, calling it legal boilerplate, and insisting Grandpa's true feelings were about making sure Claire was taken care of. My mother backed him up, growing teary-eyed as she accused me of dishonoring your grandfather's memory by refusing to yield. I pointed out that if Grandpa truly wanted Claire to have more, he would have written the will that way. Neither of them had a real answer for that. They just kept leaning on guilt and family obligation. Meanwhile, Claire remained silent, looking increasingly uncomfortable but refusing to speak up. When I tried to talk to her one-on-one, she only whispered that she didn't want to get between Mom and Dad. I was exhausted, angry, and hurt beyond words. I started second-guessing myself. Was I truly being selfish? Was I betraying my family over money? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the money. It was about years of being overlooked and undervalued. It was about finally being seen as worthy of equal treatment. Feeling desperate, I reached out to the one person I trusted completely, my grandmother, Grandpa's widow. I told her everything. Grandma was furious. She was a gentle, elegant woman most of the time, but hearing what my father was trying to do brought out a fiery side I'd never seen. She said in no uncertain terms that my parents had no right to change the will, and that Grandpa's intentions were crystal clear. Then she dropped a bombshell of her own. Several years earlier, she revealed, my parents had actually tried to persuade Grandpa to leave his entire estate to Claire alone. They'd framed it as helping Claire's future, painting me as someone who'd be fine on his own. Grandpa had firmly refused. He'd told them he believed all his grandchildren deserved an equal start in life, no matter how successful one might appear. To safeguard that, he'd even added the clause about disinheriting anyone who tried to contest the distribution. Grandma wasn't about to let my parents railroad me. She gathered copies of documents, including the will's language, and contacted the attorney handling the estate. She also looped in my dad's siblings, my aunts and uncles. When they heard what was happening, they were livid. Within days, my father found himself outnumbered. The family confronted him, pointing out how Grandpa had made his intentions clear. Legally, my father's actions could have exposed him to severe consequences as an executor if he proceeded. Cornered, my parents backed off, but not gracefully. They were furious that I'd dragged the family into this. They accused me of turning everyone against them. My mother wept, insisting I'd shattered the family and that I was greedy and ungrateful. My father threatened to cut me out of his will entirely and said I wouldn't be welcome in their house if I accepted Grandpa's inheritance. He claimed I'd proved I cared more about money than family loyalty. My mother dealt the cruelest blow, telling me that by keeping the money, I was proving I'd never truly loved them. I was devastated. All the old memories of being overlooked and pushed aside crashed back in. But at the same time, I felt an unfamiliar sense of resolve. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for myself, even if it meant facing down my own parents. Claire, caught in the middle, continued to stay silent. Part of me wished desperately she'd stand up for me just once, but I also understood she'd been conditioned her whole life to seek our parents' approval. As I stared down the possibility of losing my parents entirely, I knew there was no turning back. I was determined not to let them steal what Grandpa wanted me to have. Not just the money, but the validation that I was equal and deserving too. After my parents' attempt to hijack my inheritance fell apart, the weeks that followed felt like I was living in a bizarre mix of relief and raw grief. I'd won the immediate battle, but the cost was my relationship with my parents hanging by a thread. Grandma, true to her promise, moved swiftly. She got in touch with Grandpa's lawyer and the other executor named in the will, a longtime family friend who'd always respected Grandpa's sense of fairness. Together, they reviewed every detail of the estate and confirmed what I already knew. My parents had no legal right to reroute my inheritance to Claire. Still, my father refused to back down without a fight. He threatened lawsuits, trying to intimidate both me and Grandma. He accused me of manipulating the family, of brainwashing Grandma, and claimed I'd misled everyone about Grandpa's wishes. His anger was volcanic, spilling over into furious phone calls and scathing emails that left me shaking. It became clear that I needed to protect myself, not just emotionally, but legally. Many people online and in my circle urged me to get my own attorney, and I did. My lawyer reviewed the will and confirmed that my position was rock solid. He advised me to document every interaction and be prepared to take legal action if my father continued his threats. That gave me a layer of confidence I'd never had before. Fortunately, things didn't end up in court. Grandma and my aunts and uncles confronted my father as a united front, making it impossible for him to push his plan any further. Eventually, the lawyer overseeing the estate removed my father as an executor due to his blatant conflict of interest and attempts to misappropriate funds. It was humiliating for my dad, and though part of me felt sorry for him, a bigger part was simply relieved. In the end, I received my full inheritance, exactly as Grandpa intended. I remember the day it finally cleared into my account, a rush of mixed emotions washing over me. On one hand, I felt vindicated and deeply grateful to my grandfather. On the other, I felt a cavernous sadness that my own parents had tried to steal what was meant for me, purely because they couldn't bear to treat me as an equal to Claire. But the family fallout was massive. My parents doubled down on their narrative that I was selfish, greedy, and obsessed with money. They started trying to sway extended family members to their side, spreading stories that I'd somehow manipulated Grandpa into favoring me, or that I was trying to ruin Claire's life. Thankfully, most of the family saw through their tactics, especially with Grandma and my aunts and uncles speaking up for me. One of the lowest moments came about a month after everything was settled. We were at a family gathering hosted by my aunt, an event my parents hadn't even been invited to. They showed up anyway, unannounced. The moment they walked in, my dad started yelling about how I'd taken from Claire and turned Grandma against them. My mom threw an old photo album at my feet, accusing me of destroying all these memories. It took several relatives to calm things down and eventually escort my parents out. Through it all, Grandma became my fiercest advocate. She told stories about how proud Grandpa had been of my accomplishments, that he'd kept a scrapbook with newspaper clippings, academic awards, and even the playbill from my 4th grade play they'd missed. Hearing that both warmed and broke my heart. Grandma also took it upon herself to clear the air with the wider family. She hosted a separate gathering, without my parents, where she explained the truth about the years of favoritism I'd endured, including events I'd almost forgotten or never even known about. Having someone finally validate my pain felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. While the legal battle ended in my favor, emotionally, I felt like I was standing in the wreckage of my family. And yet, for the first time, I also felt something new, a quiet sense of pride that I'd defended myself, even against the people who should have protected me the most. In the aftermath of the legal chaos, there was one thing I never expected: how much all this would change my relationship with Claire. For most of my life, I'd thought of her as the center of the storm, the golden child who, whether intentionally or not, had absorbed all the affection and attention that seemed perpetually withheld from me. At first, Claire stayed quiet. Throughout the inheritance drama, she seemed hesitant and uneasy, clearly torn between loyalty to our parents and the growing realization that what they were doing was wrong. For weeks, we barely spoke beyond polite small talk. There was a wall between us built from decades of favoritism, misunderstandings, and the lingering guilt I felt for resenting her, even though it wasn't truly her fault. Then, one afternoon, out of the blue, Claire texted me. "Can we talk? Just us?" We met at a small coffee shop downtown. I was nervous as hell, bracing for another plea for me to make things right by giving her my inheritance. But that wasn't what happened. Claire sat across from me, staring into her cup for a long time before she finally spoke. Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Danny, for not standing up for you, for letting Mom and Dad push you aside all these years." My chest tightened. I could barely breathe as she kept talking. She admitted that being the favorite child hadn't been as wonderful as it looked from the outside. She described the relentless pressure to perform, the constant meddling from our parents, and how she'd never felt like she was allowed to fail or figure things out on her own. Anytime she tried to assert independence, they'd swoop in and take over, solving problems she wanted to handle herself. It left her feeling trapped, incapable, and afraid to step out of line. "I used to think you were so lucky because you could do things on your own," she said. "I didn't realize how alone you felt." We spent hours talking, pouring out stories from our childhoods, moments I'd seen as pure evidence of favoritism. She sometimes remembered with a different kind of pain, like how Mom fussing over her stomach aches often felt suffocating rather than loving, or how she'd secretly envied me going off to Harvard's summer program, wishing she'd had a passion for something the way I did. I realized that while Claire had certainly benefited from favoritism, she'd also been stifled by it. Our parents' protectiveness had left her ill-prepared to handle real life. In a moment that stunned me, Claire confessed that she'd decided to use her own inheritance, her rightful share, to enroll in community college. She said watching me stand up for myself had inspired her to finally take control of her life. "I'm tired of letting Mom and Dad decide who I am," she said. "I want to figure out who I can be." I nearly cried right there in that coffee shop. Since then, Claire and I have been rebuilding our relationship, piece by piece. We've started having monthly sibling days, just the two of us, grabbing coffee, going hiking, or exploring new places around town. Each time we talk more openly about our past, our dreams, and how we want our futures to look without our parents dictating every move. Although there's still a lot of hurt and healing left between us, I feel closer to Claire than I have since we were little kids playing in the backyard. For the first time, it feels like we're equals, not the golden child and the overlooked son, but two adults trying to untangle the mess our parents created. And while I can't say I've completely let go of the resentment, I've started to replace some of it with compassion. For Claire, for myself, and for the years we both lost to our parents' misguided love. Even as my bond with Claire began to heal, the situation with my parents grew increasingly complicated. The fallout from the inheritance battle sent shockwaves through our entire extended family. At first, my parents were relentless. My mother and father doubled down on their narrative that I was greedy and ungrateful, that I cared more about money than family loyalty. They began working the phones, trying to recruit relatives to their side, spinning half-truths and outright lies. According to them, I'd manipulated Grandpa, brainwashed Grandma, and destroyed the family's unity for my own gain. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that wanted my parents to see me, to love me without conditions. But at the same time, I couldn't stomach the idea of letting them walk all over me again. Luckily, most of the extended family saw through my parents' attempts to control the narrative. My aunts and uncles rallied around me, especially after Grandma shared the truth about my parents' earlier attempt to have Grandpa leave everything solely to Claire. Grandma emerged as a kind of matriarchal warrior in all of this. She began telling stories about how Grandpa had always been proud of my academic achievements and how he'd been adamant about treating all his grandchildren equally. She even revealed that Grandpa kept a scrapbook filled with my report cards, newspaper clippings about my science fair wins, and the program from the school play my parents had missed. Hearing that was simultaneously heartwarming and heartbreaking. Meanwhile, my mother started showing signs of doubt. After some long conversations with Grandma and witnessing Claire's surprising decision to enroll in community college, she began quietly questioning the way she and my father had handled things all these years. She reached out to me one evening, her voice trembling over the phone. She admitted that maybe they'd gone too far, and that perhaps the years of favoritism had hurt both Claire and me more deeply than she'd ever understood. She said she was considering therapy to try to unpack her own issues. We've since had a few one-on-one lunches where she's opened up in ways she never did when I was growing up. She's apologized, cautiously and imperfectly, for prioritizing Claire and for dismissing my feelings. It's not a total reconciliation. We have decades of baggage. But there's a flicker of hope. I'm cautiously letting her in, while keeping firmer boundaries than I ever used to. My father, however, remains a different story. He refuses to accept that he did anything wrong. He still insists he was simply protecting Claire and acting in the family's best interest. He's barely speaking to me, and when he does, it's cold and clipped. He's even been distant toward Claire since she started college, which devastates her. He's tried various emotional blackmail tactics, like threatening to sell our childhood home if Claire and I don't come to our senses, or dangling forgiveness if we just admit we were wrong. But I've learned not to take the bait. For the first time, I'm not bending over backwards to earn his approval. It's both liberating and profoundly sad. The extended family dynamic has changed significantly. I've grown closer to my aunts, uncles, and cousins who supported me through the ordeal. A few cousins who stayed neutral at first eventually reached out to me privately, expressing that they respected me for standing up for myself. We've even started a monthly cousins' dinner, a safe, drama-free zone where we can catch up without worrying about my parents crashing the party and starting fights. It's not lost on me how strange it feels to be rebuilding my sense of family more with my extended relatives than with my own parents. But there's also a quiet sense of relief. I'm learning that family doesn't always mean the people who raised you. It can also mean the people who choose to stand by you when things get hard. And as hard as it's been, I'm discovering that sometimes distance is the healthiest choice, even if it means redefining what family looks like for me. With the dust finally settling around the inheritance, I found myself standing at a crossroads I never imagined I'd reach so young. For the first time in my life, I had real financial security, and I had to figure out what to do with it. One of my first moves was simple but life-changing. I paid off every penny of my student loans. For years, those monthly payments had hung over me like a storm cloud, dictating my career choices and keeping me awake at night. Hitting zero balance on my loan accounts felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for a decade. After that, I sat down with a financial advisor, determined not to squander what Grandpa had left me. We built a diversified investment portfolio that gives me the freedom to think long-term instead of constantly worrying about bills. But while the financial part was empowering, the deeper transformation was happening inside me. The inheritance wasn't just about money. It was a signal that my grandfather had believed in me and wanted me to have a fair shot. For the first time, I started considering what I wanted out of life, beyond simply surviving my family's chaos. I began to dream again. One dream that's taken root in my mind is starting a community center dedicated to affordable mental health services and financial literacy classes. During my own battles with anxiety and depression, fueled by years of feeling invisible in my own home, I often wished there'd been somewhere I could go for help that didn't cost a fortune. I'm not rushing into it overnight, but I'm setting aside funds and building a plan. Perhaps the biggest surprise has been how all this chaos has shifted my professional focus. Working in finance has been steady and lucrative, but over the past year, I've realized my true passion lies in helping people navigate the kind of dysfunctional family dynamics I endured. I'm even exploring the possibility of going back to school to become a therapist, specializing in adult children of emotionally immature parents. Volunteering at a local youth center has become one of the most meaningful parts of my week. I've started mentoring teenagers who come from difficult family situations, helping them see that their worth isn't determined by how their parents treat them. It's given me purpose in a way my corporate job never did. As for my relationship with Claire, it's continued to grow stronger. Once a month, we have our Siblings Day, just the two of us. Sometimes we hike, other times we binge-watch old shows or try new restaurants. It's become a ritual of sorts, a space where we can reconnect without the shadows of our parents hovering over us. One of the most touching things Claire has done is agree to go to therapy herself. She's determined to build her own life, and watching her find her independence has been deeply healing for me, too. In many ways, we're both trying to learn who we are outside the identities our parents forced on us for so long. Emotionally, I still have hard days. Sometimes, memories come flooding back. The birthday parties I never had. The proud moments that went unnoticed. The sting of my father's cold dismissals. But more and more, those memories feel like scars rather than open wounds. Above all, I've learned that my worth was never tied to how my parents treated me. For so many years, I bent myself into knots trying to earn their approval. Now, I'm building a life based on my own values and passions, and I'm discovering it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. And though the road ahead isn't perfect, I finally feel like I'm steering my own ship instead of drifting on someone else's current. Looking back over the past year, it's astonishing how much my life has changed. Not just on paper, but in the way I see myself and the world around me. There were moments when I wondered if standing my ground was the right thing to do. There were nights I lay awake, consumed with guilt and fear, questioning whether I should have simply given Claire my share of the inheritance to keep the family peace. But the more I've grown and healed, the clearer one truth has become. Protecting my boundaries and asserting my worth wasn't selfish. It was necessary. For too long, I measured my value by my parents' approval, bending myself in half trying to earn scraps of attention or praise. It took years, and the crucible of this inheritance battle, to realize that family loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of your own dignity or mental health. If there's one thing I wish I could tell anyone else walking a similar path, it's this. You are allowed to defend what's rightfully yours, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. You don't owe anyone your silence, your money, or your peace just to keep up appearances. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated. Love and loyalty get tangled with guilt, obligation, and old wounds that go back decades. But you deserve fairness, you deserve respect, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is set boundaries, even with the people who raised you. My relationship with my mother is slowly healing. It's a fragile process, full of careful conversations and cautious hope. I'm grateful she's trying, and I'm open to seeing where that path leads, but I'm also keeping my guard up, knowing that real change takes time. As for my father, I've accepted that he may never acknowledge the harm he caused or the fairness of my choices. It still hurts, and some days the absence of his approval feels like a hollow ache. But I'm learning to let go of the need to change him. His inability to see me for who I am doesn't diminish my worth. Meanwhile, my bond with Claire has turned into something I once thought was impossible. A true sibling relationship, free from the shadows of favoritism. We're discovering who we are, separately and together, and that feels like a miracle all its own. I've also learned that family can mean more than blood ties. My aunts, uncles, cousins, and especially my grandmother have shown me that real family is made up of the people who choose to stand beside you, even when things get messy. My chosen family of friends and supporters has been a lifeline I'll forever be grateful for. Today, I'm excited about my future. I'm exploring new passions, contemplating a career shift into mental health support, and using my inheritance to build the kind of life and hopefully the kind of world I once wished existed for myself. To anyone out there struggling under the weight of family expectations, you are not alone. Your story matters, and it's never too late to claim the life you deserve. I'm finally discovering that my value doesn't come from my parents' approval or from anyone else's opinion. It comes from who I am and who I choose to become. And for the first time in a long time, I feel genuinely hopeful about the road ahead.